The following program is presented by the H2M Podcast Network.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Robyn Nelson with another edition of Wrestle Popcast. And my guest tonight is a comic book writer and an attorney, John Crowther. How's it going, John?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad you came on. So how are you doing during this whole crisis?
Yeah, a lot of lockdown. I'm kind of, as we're talking, I'm wandering through my ever-growing garden. It's expanded a lot with the lockdown. I'm lucky enough, living here in Florida, we've got some subtropical weather, and there's a really good, it's an orchid place that's kind of near me. So my wife and I spend a lot of time there buying stuff, and our backyard kind of looks like we've expanded the orchid store, I think. So it's been good. It's been keeping me busy, getting me doing a lot of outside stuff, and continuing to have some good writing time in. So making the most of it.
So growing up, you were a professional wrestling fan, and you watched CWF with Gordon Solie.
Oh yeah. Growing up here in Florida, I'm a little bit older than maybe some of the guys that listen, but growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, before WWF had really expanded into the television territorial fun. So down here in Florida, the stuff that we watched was CWF coming out of Tampa, and of course they would travel and do a lot of house shows. So that's what I grew up on. Dusty Rhodes, Blackjack Mulligan. I remember being a kid and seeing Barry Windham, some of his early matches, seeing Dustin Rhodes debut and Kendall Windham. Yeah, great place to be. And really some top-notch wrestling going on down here.
I'm also in Florida, too. When you were younger, you met Kevin Sullivans. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Kevin was, it's funny, this was during his time when he was playing I forget what the exact name of it was, but he was kind of like not the Taskmaster, but he played like a satanic kind of guy. So it was during that time, and he was a client, actually, of my father's. My dad's an attorney here in Florida. And I remember being a little kid, and the first time I saw him in person, I was used to seeing him on TV. First time I saw him in person, I was at the office. I used to come to the office every day after work, and in walks Kevin Sullivans and woman, actually, who later Benoit's wife, and Nancy Benoit, but she was Nancy Sullivan at the time, and she came in because she was from my hometown at DeLand. And I see them come in, and of course I'm in, wrestling fan heaven as they come in, but also scared at the same time because this is a guy that could throw fireballs on his opponents, in matches. So as he comes in, there was a little window that separated my mother's library and office from my dad's office, and I'm climbing on the chair trying to peek through to see him. And my mom's like, don't do that. This is your dad's client. And I'm like, Mom, you don't understand. This is like the devil in there with Dad. And, of course, my mom, being a sweet mom, didn't want to ruin the magic of wrestling, so she didn't want to tell me anything was fake. So she's like, well, honey, I'm sure your dad's going to be okay. He's not going to throw a fireball at your dad today, but you still need to be quiet. So that was the first time I actually got to meet Kevin Sullivans in person, and he was really a wonderful guy. And then growing up here in DeLand, which was pretty close to Daytona Beach, where Sullivan was living at the time. I think he was living in South Daytona. And we'd see him out at the Steak and Shake. We'd see him out. There's a little Japanese restaurant there called Sapporo's. Remember seeing him there and him seeing me peeking over at him from across the room. And he called me over. We got to have some sushi with him. And I think it was Oliver Humperdinck and Mark Lewin, who was going by, what was his name back then? Oh, geez. I'm sure you remember. Part of that crew that Sullivan had.
Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue. Yeah, I can see the.
Yeah. Oh, the Purple Haze. The Purple Haze.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was actually the first time I ever got to meet wrestlers in person. Was Kevin Sullivan, and it's always stuck with me. And then years later, I had the opportunity to meet him and run into him again at a luncheon, on these Legends luncheons down in Tampa. I had gone to with Brian Blair, and I got to relay the story, and he actually did remember. It was actually pretty cool.
I would have been marking out right there since he remembered everything.
Yeah. So it's really, really, really neat experience. And growing up here in Florida just really lets you kind of be in among a lot of these guys. You'd just see them out. You'd see them around. They were traveling the state. They were hitting a lot of the different arenas around Florida. I remember here in DeLand, where I was growing up in particular, they do the Armory, which is probably about 2 or 3 miles from my house now. They sometimes do Stetson's Edmond Center, which is just about 2 blocks away from me. So it's some really great memories.
Also, how'd you become a writer and get into the comic book business? And were you a comic book fan growing up too, as well as the pro wrestling?
Yeah. So at that time in my life, back when I was a little kid, comics were different too. I mean, they were the same, but how you got them was a little bit different. I don't really recall there being a lot of, you go to the comic store now, and these comic shops are these massive stores, generally speaking. But back then, it wasn't quite like that. At least not around here. So where I'd get my comics, if you remember the old Rexall Drugs, I don't know how old you are, but these Rexall drug stores would have comics, but they'd have them on these spinner racks, So I'd get dropped off from the school, get off the bus, and I'd always pass an old Rexall drug store, and that's where I'd dip in and grab my comics. At the time, they're going about 50 cents, 75 cents a pop. So I was a big fan of comics at the same time I was growing up on wrestling. And but never really thought of the two together. It was just kind of, I loved comics and I loved wrestling. So about 5 years ago, I always enjoyed writing. About 5 years ago, I had a teenage daughter, and we would go and hit some of these local comic book conventions over in Tampa and Orlando and such, and she loved comics. And one of the problems though I had was that I didn't feel that girls had a lot of female characters to look up to that weren't like hypersexualized in comics.
Yeah.
Who weren't just a sidekick. So I said, well, why don't I, I've always been one, if you don't like something, do something about it. So I went out and created my own comic book character. And but I'd never done a comic. So I created this idea. I wrote off to an artist who I had admired when I was a kid. His name's Del Barris. And Del had done a lot of work for DC Comics. He worked on Blue Beetle. I think he broke into the industry working on Savage Sword of Conan. And then he got into animation. He was one of Stan Lee's animators for Spider-Man. And I did some other things, but I wrote him a letter and kind of told him what my idea was, who I was. And about 2 months later, I heard back from him. He sent me a letter, actually a package, with a letter in it and some original art. And he said, I love your idea. Let's do it. Give me a call. So gave him a call, and Del told me to write me a script, and we'll put something together. But, of course, having never written a comic, I had no idea how to write a script. So, I'm back in the same boat. How the hell do you write a script? So I started doing some research, tracked down a website for, if you're into comics, Marv Wolfman. Marv Wolfman, one of his big projects was Crises on Infinite Earths, and that was another
great series.
Favorite title of mine as I was a kid. Yeah. So I reached out to Marv Wolfman on his site and acquired a script for one of his Teen Titans stories, and a signed script, and that became kind of like my template. So wrote my first comic, wrote my first script, sent it off to Del. He put it together. Luckily, he knew a publisher here in Florida, AC Comics. They picked it up, and had my first comic book published in 2015.
That's pretty
good.
That's pretty awesome.
Did pretty good. So it got noticed by some folks over at a publisher in Texas called Antarctic Press. I don't know if you've heard of Antarctic.
Yeah, I have.
They've been around for a while. They were, when Diamond Distribution really busted out as a distributor, they were one of the 10 original comic book companies that they were working with. So, they've been around for a while. They're kind of lower to mid-level, but I reached out to them, talked to them about my series. They liked the idea. And I ended up doing a couple of volumes with them, about 6 issues. But at the same time, I befriended a wrestler. We had mutual friends, and his name was Nikolai Volkoff. And Nikolai and I started talking, and he loved comics, which was pretty cool. Because you think about the wrestlers, at least I did, but I wasn't thinking about them as comic book fans.
Yeah.
You're thinking about them as wrestlers. You're not thinking comics and toys and stuff like that. And actually, over the years, I've learned a lot of these guys, they're just like us, the guys and the gals. A lot of them love comics. A lot of them love toys. A lot of them are collectors. Really cool people. And so he told me, he said, I've spoken with a few people about getting a comic done on my life, but no one's ever come through on it. We talk about it, and they just kind of fade off and don't hear from them again. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, Nikolai, if I tell you I'm going to do a comic for you, I promise you I'll get it done. So I reached out to some folks who I know you were talking to earlier, Kevin Laporte.
Yes.
He's out of Alabama. He and his partner there, Amanda Rachels, they had created a publishing company called Inverse Press. And Inverse is known for doing horror-type comics.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny because later on I have done some horror stuff too, with like Heavy Metal Magazine and things like that. It's kind of blossomed into that. But I reached out to them. I backed a couple of their projects on Kickstarter. And I told them, I said, hey, I got this idea about doing a biographical wrestling comic on Nikolai Volkoff. And they loved the idea. So Kevin and I sat down and we talked and we decided to create what's called Squared Circle Comics, who is really the publisher of all the wrestling stuff that we're doing. So we started with Nikolai, and from there it's just, it's really blown up. It's really blossomed. Introducing me to new people such as Bruno Sammartino and Brian Blair, Lanny Poffo. A lot of these books have come out over the last, 5 years, culminating in what we're doing with on Kickstarter right now, that Encyclopedia.
So how'd you guys, we were talking about that, how'd you come up with the comic book Encyclopedia of Pro Wrestling, and how long did it take you to go out and interview all these pro wrestlers? You also interviewed, Rocky Johnson before he passed, and yeah,
absolutely,
and Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Yeah, Hacksaw. I mean, the list goes on. What we've done with the Encyclopedia is over the last 5 years, we've been doing a lot of like single issues and series for various wrestlers, and we decided that once we got ourselves a nice collection of books together, we wanted to just make them all available in a larger volume. So basically what this encyclopedia is it's a collection, not all, but a collection of almost all of the books that we've done over the last 5 years with some additional added encyclopedia entries. So that's what this is. So this book, it doesn't include Rocky. Now, you're right, I did do Rocky's book. We just finished that one up and released it literally a couple of weeks before he passed away, which was, was a hard thing because Rocky and I had been doing, we were pretty much pretty well known on the Florida circuit as doing a lot of things together. Basically any con I did in Florida or Rocky did in Florida, we were together. So, but we did get his book out right before he passed away, and that one will most likely be in Volume 2. But Volume 1 is going to contain, as you mentioned, it's going to have Hacksaw Jim Duggan in it. He'll have Brian Blair, Jim Brunzell, Lanny Poffo, Sonny from Glow. We're working with several of the Glow girls. Ricky Morton from the Rock and Roll Express, Bruno, Nikolai, Bobby Fulton and Fantastics. So it's a nice collection, a little over 280 pages, I would say.
So what was it like to work with Patricia Summerlin, who is known as Sunny from Glow? What was that like to get her story into a comic book form?
Oh, she's a sweetheart, I'll tell you. I was a fan of Glow, probably not as big as I was of the regular NWA stuff and such, but I was a fan of Glow, and she was just a doll. I'll tell you, she's, even to this day, and all of these people, including Patricia, have become good friends, and it's, just learning the things that she went through. She had a pretty, her life wasn't all roses. She had a lot of issues that she had to deal with growing up, and being able to turn it into something that is as great as Glow was. I mean, Glow was a, I don't know if you were around when Glow was out in the 80s.
I was.
How old you are.
Oh, I was.
So, it was a pretty innovative series and really kind of set the tone. I mean, obviously it was a little different tone than today's women's wrestling is, but it did kind of set the tone for what we see the divas doing now and just kind of over the top characters and things like that. It was actually pretty cool.
That was great. You got to sit down with her. I got a chance to get to know her too as a friend, and she's just like a very down to earth lady.
Absolutely, wonderful person.
Yeah, I love her to death, and she's helped me a lot with a lot of stuff too. And and if she's listens to this, I just want to say thank you, Patricia.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm sure she'll be listening. She's pretty active on social media. Really likes to interact with her fans and such. I mean, she's just another great character that's been out there, but not just a character, but a good person and a great friend.
Also, when you built your friendship with Nikolai Volkoff, What was a cool story he told to you?
Or what? A good story from Nikolai? I mean, he's got a lot of great.
Yeah.
Nikolai, a lot of people, remember him as being like the Russian guy that came in. He really did defect. I mean, when he came over, he was initially a kid growing up in the Czech Republic, and he told me when he was sitting down, when he decided he wanted to leave and come to the West, he actually didn't defect to the United States. He defected to Canada. And he did it because he had learned that his great-grandfather actually, was a personal bodyguard for Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, and he was killed by communists. So that is when Nikolai decided that he didn't like communism and he wanted to get out of it and come here. So his father told him the best way you're ever going to get out of the country is to focus on sports, because sports will give you that ticket, whether it be Olympics or whatever it could be. So that's what he did. He started training in judo and in powerlifting, and he eventually was, I think he came down, he was like 4-time Yugoslavian powerlifting champion by the time he was 17. So that tells you a lot. Mm-hmm. And this guy was a massive kid, powerful guy, and he actually defected to Canada during a powerlifting competition in Austria. Before he was supposed to go into the finals, he just basically walked right out the door and walked into the Canadian embassy and asked for asylum. Really a brave thing to do for a 17-year-old kid. But the first time I met him, it was kind of a funny introduction. We had talked on the phone. It's not the first time we met. First time we met in person. We talked on the phone over about a year or so, and he was coming down to Florida to be at WrestleMania in Orlando. So he said, "Hey, John, why don't you meet me at the WWE hotel?" So I drive over, which is kind of funny how it started. I drive over, and Orlando's a big town for people who haven't been there, but trying to get around with Disney and all that kind of stuff. So I arrive in the parking lot, and I get lost, So here's me. I'm in my 40s. I'm wearing my glasses. I'm trying to carry comic book pages around. I drop the pages in the parking lot. I don't know where to get in. Some guy starts picking them up. I look up, and it's Cesaro helping me lift my pages up off the parking lot.
Wow! So, you had Cesaro!
So I look at him. I'm like, are you Cesaro? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, shit. I'm like, thanks, man. And I'm like, well, how do I get into this hotel? So basically I get an escort into the hotel by Cesaro, who walks me through the lobby. I'm looking around. Mark Henry is there. I see Arn Anderson in there. I see Shane McMahon in there. I mean, I'm in wrestling fanboy heaven as I'm walking through here. He takes me to the elevator, puts me on the elevator. Just as Nikolai's on the top floor, I hit the button to take me up to the top floor. A hand comes in, stops the elevator. I mean, this is total fanboyism here going here. In steps Roman Reigns. So I ride the elevator to the top floor with Roman Reigns. And the nice thing about it is I got pictures of all this stuff, Uh-huh. So Roman Reigns rides up with me. I start talking to him, telling him where I'm going. He's like, good luck with everything. I walk down. I find Nikolai's room. The door's kind of cracked open a little bit. I knock on the door. Come on in, So he's not worried about seeing who it is or anything. Just come on in, So I open the door, and there's Nikolai. He looks at me, and he says, you're a lot fatter in person than you sounded on the phone. What do you do? I'm like, oh, all right. He goes, get on over here and get on the floor. So I spent the first probably 15, 20 minutes of meeting Nikolai with him showing me how to do crunches on his hotel room floor at WrestleMania.
That is so funny. So
that was a treat.
That is awesome. And then what was it like working with Hacksaw to get his story into the Encyclopedia?
Okay, well, Hacksaw and I, because, he used to live actually not that far from here. He used to live over in Melbourne, but once I started working with Hacksaw, he was living up in I think it's pronounced Lugoff, like Lugoff, South Carolina.
Okay.
So, I honestly, all of my interviews with Hacksaw have been by telephone, but he's a great guy. Him and his wife, Deborah, they're always, answering the phone or responding to emails and things like that. And just, I kind of miss the in-person encounters. I do enjoy the interviews when I get to sit down with somebody in person.
Yeah.
But I've had, hours of phone conversations with Hacksaw, and it's just really a treat too. I mean, and you hear these guys, and the funny thing is you close your eyes and you hear them talking, and it's those iconic voices coming through the phone, whether it be Hacksaw, whether it be Lanny Poffo. Well, I'm lucky Lanny does live here in Florida, so I do a lot of appearances with Lanny too. But you hear these guys, Nikolai, Lanny, Bruno, Rocky Johnson, and to be a fan of them over the years, and to sit there and you're interviewing them, and just honestly, just close your eyes, and it's like you're imagining them on TV talking to you, because those voices are so familiar from what you've grown up with. It's really a neat experience.
Yeah, and speaking of Lanny Poffo, I got a chance to meet him and interview him as well. And he's just a nice, down-to-earth guy. And I grew up, watching him wrestling. I grew up out in California, so I saw him at a live WWF event when he was, Leaping Lanny Poffo, where he was doing the poems, and he would throw a Frisbee out. So I caught the
that's right. Yeah.
I caught the Frisbee, and he signed it. So when I interviewed him over at Future Great Wrestling, which I'm part of here in Cincinnati, I told him that story, and he just liked it. And then he told me a story about him, getting one of the boomerangs from the tag team, the Kangaroos.
Yeah, that's exactly true. Because I remember when I was talking to him, I said, "Where did you come up with the idea for the Frisbee?" And he said, "Actually, it came from the Kangaroos." And he said that they used to throw what are those things?
Boomerangs
out into the audience,
Yep.
And he says, I didn't want to copy him, and I didn't want to actually throw a boomerang. I mean, they use those to hunt, in a lot of places. But he came up with the idea of the Frisbee, and he'd write a little poem in the Frisbee, and he'd throw it out to the fans.
Yeah, and he's also told me he still has that same boomerang, like how I have still that same Frisbee today.
That's really cool.
I know.
You find a lot of these wrestlers, he grew up in a wrestling family.
Yes, he
with
did.
His dad and
Randy.
And he actually was. Yeah, well, he was actually wrestling before Randy was.
Yes, he was.
Randy was in baseball, and Lanny followed his dad directly into wrestling. Randy took that segue off and played baseball, played for the Reds and everything before he came in. And actually was a referee when Lanny was wrestling before Randy, bulked up and really stepped it up as Randy Savage. But he was always around wrestling. And a lot of these guys have been, whether they were born into it or a lot of times they were just fans of it from an early age. So, and they are now. I mean, they're still fans of what they see or fans of the guys that they performed with. One of the neat ones I talked to was Bobby Fulton. If you remember Bobby Fulton and the Fantastics.
Yes, I do. I'm good friends with Bobby Fulton.
Yeah.
I know him personally.
Okay. Well, Bobby's a great guy. I remember talking to him, and his is really one of the stories I really enjoyed too, because he was really a fan who became a pro wrestler. I mean, he was a kid who, used to watch wrestling on TV. I think he would watch a lot of big-time wrestling, the stuff that the Sheik was putting out of Detroit. He would watch that stuff on TV, and he said he'd sit there and he'd go to church with his parents, and then he would run as fast as he could from the church back to his house so he could watch wrestling on TV. But he was a fan who, eventually he'd start going to the promotions that were local. He'd help put the ring up. And, of course, the wrestlers weren't smartening him up. They didn't do that back then. I mean, to everybody who was a fan, you were coming out and everything you saw, it was legit, And so he would help set up the ring. Eventually he'd ask wrestlers to show him how to do certain moves, and they'd show him how to do moves, still wouldn't smarten him up. And I remember him telling me one time he was about 17 years old. He'd gotten his first pair of boots, and some of the wrestlers had been showing him a few moves in the ring, and promoter comes up to him. It's out in Chillicothe, Ohio, and says, Bobby, I need you to get in the ring. He goes, one of our wrestlers didn't show up. But Bobby says, but I'm not. Her name's Jimmy, but he says, I'm not 18. He says, well, you're 18 tonight. So he hops in the ring, and of course they hadn't told him it's a work, So he's in the ring waiting, and they send out his opponent, and they didn't tell his opponent it was a work either. So these two guys get in the ring, and they literally started beating the hell out of each other for about 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes before they entered the locker room and broke them up. And Bobby said, and that was when he was introduced to wrestling. He wasn't even told that nothing was scripted to him. They just threw him in the ring and let him go at it. And he made about $5 that night. He said he was the happiest guy on the planet. He was busted up, probably a broken nose, bleeding all over the place, but he had the best time of his life.
That is pretty cool. He also had a son, Dylan, that helped him out in the business over in Chillicothe, Ohio. And Dylan's Dylan's got in the ring a little bit too, and he's studying to become an attorney too. So
yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm friends with Dylan online. We've chatted quite a bit. He helped out a lot with getting a lot of info put together for his dad and getting everything coordinated. We're actually working on issue 2 of his dad series, and you should see some of the art. Javier Lugo's our artist on that. He did some work for IDW, and his new pages are just looking fantastic.
So is Javier, is he like a big wrestling fan, or is he just like a comic book geek just like us?
I think he's a comic book geek like us who's slowly becoming... I think I've turned a few comic book geeks into wrestling fans over the last couple of years. You know, because, some of them liked wrestling, some of them... Like Kevin, who's helping publish all these things with Inverse Press. He's a huge wrestling fan. I remember we started chatting, and he remember going to his first match. He saw Rick... I forget if he said it, with Ric Flair against... you have to ask him, but he saw Ric Flair in his first ever match right there in Alabama when he was just a little kid, you know, and he's loved wrestling ever since. So us getting together to do this was a perfect fit. But some of the other guys, like Del Barris, who's done the Nikolai series and the Killer Bees, and he did the Rocky book, and I think he's going to be doing Terry Funk's book for us, and probably Magnum TA's. He's from the Philippines. He didn't really know much about wrestling. I mean, he knew, you know, like most people do, knew who Hulk Hogan is and Ric Flair and stuff like that. But beyond that, you know, he didn't know too much about wrestling. So he's a guy that I've kind of, you know, tuned into wrestling. And as I'm telling the stories and sending him the scripts and sending him, you know, images of the different guys to make sure we get everything set up straight, he's starting to learn a little bit. And I think he's becoming a bigger and bigger fan of it as it goes along. Since
you're part of Squared Circle Comics, has there been any other pro wrestlers that have reached out to you that you didn't get a chance to interview and do a story about?
Oh, yeah, we've got, I just to be perfectly honest, I probably hear from, you know, 2 to 3 wrestlers a month asking us to do a book for them. We're backed up literally to 2022 right now with guys that are just signed. I can tell you who we've got. I mean, right now we've got guys coming down the pipe. We got a book about to be finished up for Gangrel. We've got a book coming out for Billy Gunn. I mentioned Terry Funk, Magnum TA, the Warlord. We're still wrapping up the series for Bruno and Rock and Roll Express and the Killer Bees and Bobby Fulton. We've got Hollywood, who was the first ever wrestler signed by Glow. We've got her book in production right now.
Oh, I got definitely talk to Jean about that Hollywood Glow. I'm good friends with Jean. We talk like
she's great.
Yeah. She, I had her on my podcast a couple times, and then from there we built a friendship outside after the podcast. So, we would call each other, you know, like once in great so often to see how we're doing. And then I finally got to meet her down in Tennessee at the NWA 70th anniversary show.
Oh, nice. Yeah, she's wonderful. I'm about halfway through her script now, and we anticipate her book will come out, you know, more towards probably the end of 2020. With the COVID thing, it kind of put us a little bit behind schedule.
So, you know what that means? When that first issue comes out, I want it signed by you and Gene.
Oh, absolutely. But because we built up so much, I kind of mentioned it before we went on. Before we went live, I decided to try my first venture outside of comics, and just recently signed an agreement last week, actually, with the Bushwackers. And I'll be writing my first full-length autobiography that will trace the Bushwackers through their entire career, you know, which was a heck of a career, spanning the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even into the 2000s. So that'll be a lot of fun. It's something I can do, you know, when I'm not doing the comics, and just kind of keep that wrestling storytelling flowing.
That's pretty cool. You know, after you do Bushwackers, and if it does good for you, the autobiography, I can tell you another independent pro wrestler that deserves to have a book, and he would tell you tons of stories. He's been in the wrestling business for over 20 years. I mean, he's been up, you know, WWE, WCW, and he's trained like Eli Drake, Braxton Sutter, John Moxley, Drew Skill, Shauna Reed, Pepper Parks, of course, was Braxton Sarah, just said, and Eli Drake, and he also trained Sammy Callahan, and he goes by he goes by the name of Cody Hawk.
Oh yeah, I know the name.
Yeah, Cody's cool.
Yeah, there's in some of these stories. I mean, you hear from the road and from the different territories. Really, some cool, fun stories. And I if, even beyond telling them, I mean, if I could tell, even a third of the stories I hear from the guys, you'd put you on the floor. But we try and hit, at least in the comics, we try and stay a little bit more PG-13. But we also try to hit the highlights that the wrestlers view as the highlights of their career. And I've learned that what we might necessarily see as a highlight of their career isn't necessarily what they view as their highlight. So it makes it really a cool read, because you're actually hearing, because it's from interviews that I have with them, it's actually, you're hearing what they felt that they wanted to have told in their comics rather than what I'm selecting.
So, what was the hardest interview you had to do when you did, the Encyclopedia and some of the comic books you wrote?
I wouldn't really say any of them have been difficult. They've all, I talk to these guys and everything just really, it flows, I mean, I can't really say any of them have been a difficult interview. It's been hard dealing with some, not dealing with the guys, but in 3 of the books I've worked on, 3 of the gentlemen have passed away, and that's probably been the hardest part about it, is that, I have these interviews, I get to know them, we become friends, we joke. First one I lost was Bruno, and I always like to tell the story. Bruno was the first guy to ever rib me, the first wrestler. I remember when I went to WrestleMania, I was introduced to him through Nikolai, and everybody exchanged phone numbers, so I had his phone number in my phone, but I had never talked to him on the phone. And one night I'm sitting, it's about 4 o'clock in the morning, my phone starts buzzing, and I look over and it's flashing, Bruno Sammartino. And, of course, when Bruno Sammartino calls, you're going to answer the phone. I don't care what time it is. So I pick up the phone. I'm like, hello. And I hear, John, it's Bruno. I'm like, hey, Bruno, how are you? I'm good. Nikolai says I can call you anytime. Is now okay? I said, yeah, Bruno, call me whenever you want. He says, okay, good night. And he hung up on me. So, that's, just such a great guy. I mean, our first phone conversation is him just ribbing me at 4 o'clock in the morning to hang up on me. But we had some great talks, and then I lost him shortly after losing him. I lost Nikolai, and Nikolai actually we spent quite a bit of time together. We talked a lot on the phone. He flew down to Florida a couple times. One for WrestleMania. Second time he flew down. Actually stayed at my house just outside Daytona Beach, and we did a Daytona Beach Comic Con and hit a bunch of comic shops. He'd call throughout the week just to talk to my wife sometimes. I mean, just a real sweet man. And we lost him right after Bruno. And then, of course, Rocky. Rocky, first time I met Rocky, I was at a Legends luncheon with Brian Blair. I'd done a few books. I saw Rocky when I walked in. He was sitting at a table with some of the other legends. Got my back to him, and there, hey. I turn around, it's Rocky. He says, are you the comic book guy? I said, I guess, And he says, well, you write comics, do you? Do you not write comics? I said, yeah, I write comics. He goes, well, how come you haven't written my comic yet? Am I not famous enough for you? I'm like, of course you're famous enough, Rocky. You haven't asked me. He goes, well, I'm asking you now. So, we exchanged cards, and he says, well, let's do this book, and make sure you put me over, And, we did. We talked, and we hit it off, and then, for the next, 2-3 years, Rocky and I were doing shows all over the state of Florida together. Remember him telling me at Tampa Comic Con, he says, hey, John, from here on out, I won't do another con unless you're sitting with me, which was a pretty nice thing to say. So, I miss those guys, and that's probably the hardest part of what I've done is I work with these guys, I interview them for, a couple of years, get to know them really well, hang out with them, and then I've had them taken away, which is, I'm blessed that I got to spend the time I did. I'm blessed I got to tell their story, but it's never easy to lose a friend.
Since you have all these wrestlers that have reached out to you, there's one wrestler out there I wonder if you've reached out to. He's a big comic book fan, too, and that's Hurricane Shane Helms.
Yeah, I know. Shane does a lot of work with Michael Kingston. But be that as it may, when we announced the release of and I haven't spoken with him in depth about anything.
Yeah.
When we announced the release of the Encyclopedia, he did jump on my my Facebook page and said, "What? How can you do a comic book on wrestling and not include Shane Helms?" So you never know. You never know what the future might bring.
That's pretty cool. That would be awesome. I also did a interview with Michael Kingston too. He's a great guy, and he is
a good guy.
Yeah, he knows a lot about comics and pro wrestling too. He was fun just to interview. I mean, that guy just had some stories.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, he's traveled a lot with him. He does a lot with Jerry Lawler, and he's a lot of the current roster guys. He does a lot of stuff with them, and he puts out some quality work. I don't know if you've seen his book, but he does some really good stuff. Oh,
I've seen this book. And speaking of earlier, how you were talking about conventions and wrestling shows, man, I'm missing those so bad because it's this stupid COVID-19. Gosh, tell me
about it.
I'm having pro wrestling withdrawals. I'm having comic convention, horror convention withdrawals. It's just hard, and it's just not the same.
Yeah. I want to say I've probably had about 4 or 5 conventions canceled. Most recent, I just learned this past week that the Daytona Beach comic book convention. I've done it every year over the last 4 or 5 years. It's coming up in November. Was just canceled. We had, I want to say it was maybe in like 2 or 3 weeks. We're supposed to have River City Wrestling Con up in Jacksonville, which was a really nice show. I did last year. They had the Four Horsemen there. They had a lot of the NWO guys there, and they just announced that they had to cancel it this year. So they're not going to have that one run until 2021. So yeah, it's kind of put a damper on a lot of the in-person shows. Some people have stepped up. I know Kenny Casanova and his crew had me on where they called it Wrestling Bookmarks COVID Con a couple of weeks ago, which was a real nice presentation they put together that was broadcast online and broadcast by Fight TV, which really let the fans, you'd have these 30-minute snippets where the wrestlers are on, the writers are on, and the fans can really interact with them live. And that went over really well. I know they're doing another one here, I think, in about 2 weeks. So they're trying to kind of fill the void with some of the online stuff, but I agree with you. There's nothing like that in-person meeting where you can actually meet the fans and the fans can meet the wrestlers and the creators and things like that.
Yeah, and it's hard, and I hope that they find a cure for this and this gets all rid of. I mean, it's just annoying.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's something none of us have had to live through before, and I'm sure they'll write a few comics about it down the road.
Shoot, they'll probably do movies about it. I mean, there's some... and you're like, I don't want to see a movie about that.
Just people be smart, be smart, wash your hands, don't blow your nose on people, and I think we'll all be okay.
So where can everybody find you on social media and how to get to Kickstarter to get the comic book Encyclopedia of Pro Wrestling?
Okay, well, you can find me. I mean, I'm on all the major social media sites. You can find me on Twitter. I go by my name, John Crowther. I've got a personal page, which I usually accept people as long as they don't seem too freaky. But on the personal page, you can find me. I do have a writer page. It's just John E. Crowther, comic book writer. You can find us Squared Circle Comics on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram. We're on all those sites. They've got actually a website too. If you just type in Squared Circle Comics, you can find us, and you can even find back issues of some of the old comics we've done, some of the single issues. The Kickstarter, if you're going to jump on it soon, because we've only got about 3 days left, but it is on Kickstarter. It's the comic book Encyclopedia Pro Wrestling. We got some really good deals. I mean, you can get it's a 280 plus page book. You can get it for $24.99. Every single day we give out a free random autograph to a random backer of the book. We've given out autographs for Ricky Morton, Killer Bees, Nikolai Volkoff, Sonny, Bobby Fulton, Lanny Poffo. So every day somebody's walking out of there with a free autograph. Plus there's options where you can pick up some of the autograph bundles, even by Nikolai and the Bees and Jake Hager and stuff like that. So there's some really cool rewards you can get. You can get yourself put in the book. Just a lot of really cool stuff.
Speaking of Sonny, what was that like to interview her? Boy, she's had a rough life.
Who's that, Sonny?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, it's some of that stuff, it's hard to hear it, but I think she's come above, and she's beaten a lot of the things that she had to go through over her life, and whether it be, personal dealings or the illness with her father and different things like that, and she's come back, and she's come back strong, so I like being able to, I think at the same point, you'd have to ask her, but I think at the same point, not only the interview, but just to have someone, I think, sometimes to be able to lay that stuff out to is always a good potion for the soul, to be able to get tell your story. And I will plug. She's got a book. Actually, we did the comic book, but the comic book can only tell so much. And she does have a book she's putting together with a writer named Scott Stevens. There's going to be at least 1 or 2 issues of a full-length book that's really going to tell her story. So I would recommend follow her, Sunny, if you can, Patricia online if you can find her, and stay tuned because she's got a big story to tell, and it's a real inspiration that she's been able to do what she's done and been through what she's been through, and to be where she's at today, and be out there telling her story like she is, because she's a testament to inner strength. She really is.
I know. I would love to interview her. I would love to pick her head. I think that would be a great podcast.
Absolutely. Everything from wrestling to modeling to hanging out with Kiss and Playboy. I mean, she's done it all.
Oh, I know. Hey, don't forget Patricia. Patricia was in Playboy too.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah. Yeah, she was. That's what I'm talking about. Patricia, that's Sunny. Are you thinking of the old Sunny from WWE?
Yeah, I was thinking about the old Sunny. I know Patricia had her.
I haven't worked with Sunny.
Oh, I thought you did. I knew you worked with Sunny.
No, the Sunny I've worked with is Sunny from Glow.
Oh, I know. Patricia.
The other Sunny, I think she's done some personal videos and stuff like that.
Sorry, wrong Sunny. And if Patricia, I know Patricia's going to listen to this. She's going to hit me up. She's going to probably strangle me.
Yeah, the Sunny I hang with is the clean cut girl. She's the girl next door.
Yeah, the cool
girl down the street.
Yeah, the cool. Yeah, exactly. The one who's all happy and sunny, and I can just picture her singing that song from the Brady Bunch. It's a sunshine day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the other Sunny, I think she raised a few eyebrows recently too. So I think I don't know her personally, so I don't want to say anything negative. But
no, you can't do that. I always talk positive. I never talk negative.
Exactly. I know she's had some rough spots in her life. Hopefully, she's getting that stuff together, getting it squared away.
That's pretty wild. And when this whole mess is over, I'm looking forward to get a chance to meet you in the future too. That'd be a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, where are you located at? Are you up in Tennessee or?
No. I'm originally from California, like I told you. I live in the Midwest. I live outside of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, the home of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Am I right?
No.
I think someone told me one time.
No.
I had a buddy who was from Louisville.
It's Louisville, Kentucky. It's Kentucky. It's home of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Colonel Sanders.
Well, he told me the first Kentucky Fried Chicken store was in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Really? I did not know that.
He told me.
I definitely got to look that up.
Yeah, he was from Louisville. And then I had there's actually a girl I went to law school with, and she was from Louisville, and she told me the same thing. So I always used to say, why the hell is it called Kentucky Fried Chicken, and shit's based in Cincinnati?
Wow, something? That's wild. You know something? I learned a little bit about Kentucky Fried Chicken history.
There you go. I'm not just a wrestling historian, right?
Oh, it's just great. This podcast has been fun. Wrestling, Kentucky.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Kentucky Fried Chicken, comics. What can two fanboys like us enjoy? I mean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing better than fried chicken and wrestling.
and then pick up a comic book and be like, let's read the latest comics.
Yeah, exactly.
That's too wild.
Well, great. I really appreciate you having me on, giving me some time.
Oh, hey, it was my pleasure, and thank you so much. And everybody else, thank you for listening to Wrestle Popcast. You can follow me at Facebook at Robyn Paul Nelson. You can follow me at Twitter, Wrestle Popcast at Rob Kicks. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Wrestle Popcast. And you can follow and subscribe to my platforms, Wrestle Popcast at Podcast City Network at podcastcity.net, Hitting the Marks Podcast Network, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, CastBox, wherever you can listen to a podcast. And everybody, stay safe. Always wash your hands, and everybody have